But I think a lot of people get caught up, and probably going to be some 20-year-old telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, or the latest research says this, not even understanding how to read research, it's just because someone they follow on Instagram told them this is what the research says. We're getting too complex to the point where it's the return on the complexity isn't quite as high. So the return on the investment doesn't seem to match up. So to me, I'd rather reduce the complexity slightly, get more return on my dollar being time, and yield that result. And then as the client gets more demand for specificity, then we introduce it. But for the most part, the majority of people aren't coaching top tier, near pro card or pro level bodybuilders and athletes that require that level of nuance and have 2 or 3 hours to train. Woo! What is up, YouTube? What is up, guys? We are back for another installment of whatever we call this training vlog. I don't know what we call this one yet. We've only been doing it for 3 years. I don't know what the name is. November training vlog. November 2, there you go. All right, we are at the start of week 4 of prep. Check-in yesterday was really good. So we've got our day-to-day vlogs that are coming out every Sunday. So by the time this comes out anyway, we would technically be in like week 5 or 6. But everything's moving well. Aaron is happy, physique's in a good spot. Interesting thing for me, objectively to notice this time, is that my limbs and extremities are actually coming in leaner than my torso and my midsection, which is usually the opposite of what happens. So my waist is still tightening up, clothes are sitting nicer, the pose is looking better, waist is looking smaller in circumference. But I'm noticing that legs have greater line detail already, arms have greater line detail already, conditions coming through more effectively. So to be 4 weeks out and having the limbs be leaner, 4 weeks out, 4 weeks in, yeah, it's very positive for what's to come, because that was the grind last time, was to try and get as much detail out and control fluid. So being in a leaner position is a nice change of pace. But yeah, so today we've got another leg session as per usual. Shocking, I know. We've got hamstrings, we've got standing, isolated single leg hamstring curls, leg extensions. We've got some back work in there, so we've got some pull downs, and we've got some seal rows to do as well. So good variety session today. Again, with myself and Aaron, as you probably know by now, the program hasn't changed much. Aaron just modified some of the exercise order. So I believe we have leg extensions, hamstring curls first, then into a back movement, leg extensions, back movement, calves. So for this session, I don't think much has changed too much. A couple of other sessions across the week. Exercise order and total sets have changed, but exercise selection hasn't really changed that much. Only real variations we've taken out are we've modified to a machine press to give my joints a bit of deload off the incline press. So Smith incline press, we peaked up to 162.5 kilos for 3 sets, which was pretty painful. Not painful as in like broken anything, but just painful as in like it's fucking heavy. So giving the body a bit of a break on that, moving to an incline press machine instead, give the elbows and shoulders a little bit of relaxation. That'll probably come back in though. Yeah, for the most part now, it's just pushing on with training. We haven't quite got hungry yet. Food's still going in quite well. We'll probably look at bringing food down maybe next week, start lipolytics and supplementation. But for the most part now, everything's at maintenance or holding well. So down to 105.4. I think due to earlier training this morning, we're up earlier, bowel movements were less, didn't go to the bathroom as easily, so I was about 105.8. So a little increase up from last yesterday, but I wasn't going to the bathroom anywhere near as much this morning either, so all makes sense. Not surprised, not worried, not stressed or anything like that. Yeah, we're going to finish warming up and we'll get cranked into it. Intense mustache you've had? Like, yeah, thickness, volume, it's fabulous. All right, so given that prep is underway, we'll take some of those. What are some cues and behaviors that will make you stop a prep? Context of this question, let's establish it as my own prep first and foremost. For me, what I would do to stop my prep if I started noticing cues and behaviors would be if the prep started becoming a priority over the quality, deliverability, service and value of my clients. If I can give up almost all other things for the direction of what I prep for, because it makes sense to me, like it's something bigger than myself when I compete. But if it came at the expense of what we provide other people, then I would immediately pull the pin and decide it's not worth it. Risking, losing clients due to like a failure to deliver what we promise, and be there in their corner when they need it, and make prep, the number one thing in my head on my priority list, I think would be a reason that I would quit. Not quit trading or anything like that, but just quit that season and figure out what happened. To me, the company, our clients, our team is always the number one priority. Prepping should serve that. So usually, I'll use content like this, I'll use prepping for myself to give information, give value, give context, give behind the scenes nuances, stuff that other coaches might not talk about. But yeah, if the prep started serving myself purely just me and my own ego and risk losing clients or costing clients, then I would pull the pin. Emotionally, or like in my personal life, if it started getting to the point where we couldn't be in the same room together, something like that, where the relationships are becoming impacted by prep, then I would argue that I'm just not ready to compete anyway, and it's just a problem. So that'd probably be two reasons why I would quit prep. Now, for someone else, if I was to pull them out of prep, people can handle a lot of things, but if I started seeing the continuation of identity issues, personal issues that became inflicted by competing or exacerbated by competing, then I would have no choice but to pull them out. I've always said as a coach, if I get you a first place medal, second place on stage, podium finish, whatever, and you're having to get down on your knees for $20, then I've failed as a coach, because bodybuilding in and of itself should be life progressive and facilitating success in other areas. It shouldn't be the be all end all that you want to throw your life away for. So to me, if that started to happen, then yeah, I would be asking what we're doing and what's happening, and most likely pull that person from prep, because other things need to be addressed first, and we look at competing again in the future. Something important to understand, especially coming back from injuries. Arguably, considering what my hamstring was before the tear, I don't think, and looking at pictures, images, measurements, objective information, my hamstrings haven't gone backwards. I haven't lost my hamstrings. Now, the question is why? Supplementation, yes, I'll always get thrown out there by people, so I may as well say it. But one of the things to consider is, A, we worked around the injury, we didn't stop. And then B, how quickly we got back to training through the movement, loading the movement and its length, as much length and position as possible. So we didn't let the injury heal in a shortened position where the muscle was almost, for lack of better words, like shortened up. If you sit because you have a tear, you don't do anything, that's how the body's gonna heal, that's how the injury's gonna heal. So for us, we got back to loading as fast as possible with approval from physio. As fast as we could get back to doing that is what we did. And then from there, because, and this is where understanding set versus intensity, volume versus intensity is important. The intensity couldn't be that high in relation to previous stimulus because the strength was no longer there. The strength had diminished, obviously, from the lack of training, the tear, the weakness in the muscle. So you have to compensate by that. So what we've done is increased volume in the muscle itself so that we can still generate enough stimulus to force adaptation or retain the tissue. So it wasn't going to be as heavy as I was doing nearly 200 kilo RDLs. It was not going to be 200 kilo RDLs. That's a given. We've got to rebuild back to that. Gives us a good runway for prep to increase strength as much as possible. But for the most part, it's been movements like this in isolation where we've increased set load and gradually worked up the amount of weight per set. So, I think post-injury I was doing 5 kilos on the bent over single leg machine. We're now doing 40 to 45. So progressively increasing that strength, putting it through its full range of motion under load as much as possible, and increasing the set volume is going to allow us to generate enough stimulus to retain the tissue as much as possible, if not grow some. So just because it's an injury doesn't mean things have to go backwards and kind of take a step back with it. You just need to look at the situation and assess what can be done. All right, so now we are back to kind of being a little bit stronger. We've got a pyramiding set scheme to work through. So we've got 8 to 10, 2 sets of 10 to 12, 1 set of 12 to 15. So what's probably going to happen here, weight is going to go up, so we're going to go heavier. So we'll probably look at this being about 45 kilos, which will be the heaviest this left hamstring has been on since post-tear. That'll be about 45 kilos, get through our set of 8 to 10, and then drop the weight, go 2 sets of 10 to 12. Again, drop the weight and go up to our 12 to 15. Another thing to consider as well, post-injury, trying to rebuild confidence after an injury. So it still slightly plagues my head a little bit when I do something like a hamstring, a fully lengthened hamstring movement. So if I were to do like a lane hamstring curl, even the standing hamstring curl, with how stretched the position gets and you're kind of standing tall, there's still that degree of fear that what happened is going to happen, right? So it's still something that can hit the back of your mind, like, oh, what if this happens again? Like, I'll go through it, like, oh, but what if this happens? What if this happens here? The thing that I do to work through that is build confidence in the range of motion, confidence in the movement. It's like doing anything. Confidence comes from being able to prove to yourself that you can do the thing that you're otherwise scared of doing, right? So having proof in the past that I've been able to do it is going to help me build confidence in the movement and execute it correctly without fear of what's going to go wrong. And usually what I find too is the more we focus or fixate on a fear or a problem occurring, it increases the likelihood that thing's going to come. We have a self-fulfilling prophecy of making that thing come into reality because we're kind of focused on it. Now, in this instance, that means like going through previous ranges of motion under quality controlled load and working through it and building up to it as effectively as possible. So we're not rushing through reps, we're not rushing through sets, we're not rushing through our warm-ups, it's taking the time to prime the body to get through the movement. Feel it out, know that it can handle it, make sure it's stretched and warmed up properly. And then that way when it gets under our active load or our working sets, we know then that it's going to be able to handle that situation. We're stressing the body, so we need to make sure that it can take care of it. So for the most part, take time to build up and work towards it effectively and show post-injury yourself that you can still do the movement of the thing. It's going to help remove some of that fear or just that concern about it happening. So I rarely find people don't have some degree of concern around an injury happening again. So just having that confidence to build up to it alleviates that to a degree. Is it bad as an athlete to be high in emotions or emotional sensitivity? Yes. No, so what we'd be talking about here in terms of traits or personality traits in context would be someone who's highly neurotic. So neuroticism is looked at on a spectrum of emotional stability. The higher you are in emotional instability, the more neurotic you are. Obviously, the lower in neuroticism you are, the more emotionally stable you are. So neuroticism is highly correlated with things like anxiety, depression, negative emotions, negative experiences, but it's not always doom and gloom in that regard. Sometimes, being on some degree of neuroticism, I generally find people get concerned with an outcome when they're neurotic. So having some neuroses that you have to work through is is to a degree play in your favor depending on the sport or the context that you're in. So being emotional about winning, being really pissed off if you're losing or lost, really committing yourself to something and feeling terrible because you were, out of sorts. It's not bad. It's how you allow that emotion to take over and what you do with the emotion. So someone like a Kobe or a Jordan, you could argue they became emotional as much as they were stoic and very, controlled in a sense. You watch Kobe, I think it was game 5 against the Celtics, and the reporter question was like, why aren't you smiling? He's like, we've still got 2 more games to go. What's there to smile about? That's a degree of emotional regulation where he hasn't let that single moment take over and take control. Now, had he have given up, basically just gone, well, we won this game, it's all over, we're all good, and then they end up losing the entire series, that would be a display of poor emotional regulation and high emotional sensitivity because he's highly reactive to that situation in a negative sense. That emotion's produced a poor outcome. So, bit of context to the situation, but it's not bad to be high in emotion. It's how you use that emotion and control it and regulate it. Stoics are really big on emotional regulation, make sure that you're controlling that very factor about yourself. So for the most part for me is teaching people to be more emotionally regulated in the situation, take control of situations, and not allowing that emotion to dictate your response, but instead allow your emotional control to control the situation as best as you can. And then with that, you end up being in a better position to win or to overcome the objective anyway. So what are the biggest mistakes? I want to get back to still doing some more training, nutrition questions as well. Don't want people think we're getting away from that. One of the biggest mistakes that people make in their training career, or one of the longest mistakes you'll continue to make until you realize it's time to stop making that mistake, which for a lot of people ends up being longer than they probably care to admit or it should, is having random feel workouts. So not having a structure in your week to week and your day to day about how you're training, what you're tracking, what you're progressing is going to be the fastest ways to not get results. Unless you're a genetic freak that possesses just the ability to adapt to stimulus on the first time you train, or the first time you touch a movement, then understanding every week what you are doing, how you're doing it, what's expected, how it's going to progress, controlling that progression is going to be the best way that you can predict, control, and deliver or demand the adaptation from your body to occur. It's going to allow muscle to grow and actually make a difference and get a result. So understanding then that we're limiting the amount of variables that are impacting your results so we can control it, we can track it, we can manipulate it, we can change it. Yes, go and have fun. We want you to have fun in training, that sort of thing, but just simply, I don't care if you have fun in training, I don't care if you want to do the funnest workouts every week. They should all be fun. But controlling and tracking it so that you know what you are doing. Come Tuesday of week 3, you should understand where you're supposed to be progressing and what should look like. So if you 3 sets of 10 last week and all of a sudden on the same week you come in and do 3 sets of 9 or 3 sets of 8, you have underloaded the muscle. You haven't forced adaptation to occur. You haven't forced overload, which is going to demand new stimulus on the muscle itself and create it to adapt, force it to adapt, sorry. The best way to control that is know what your numbers are, know what you're looking for. Don't set a limitation. I think a lot of people serve better to reach failure and actually strive towards it in their training than not. But don't come in here and flake it and just throw in whatever you feel like. And I hear kids, I used to do the same thing. I hear kids come into the training session like, oh, what are you training today? And like, I'm going to do some biceps, some triceps, some chest, maybe some of this, maybe some of that. You should know from the minute you are heading here what you're training and what it's going to look like. Where do I need to progress? What are my lifts going to look like? What could I have improved from last week? Was my executions correct? Was my setup better or worse this week to last week or last week to this week? So all these little things you can make changes on is going to force improvement over time. Progressive overload is the key to the game. Forcing that new tension, forcing that tension on the muscle tissue, forcing it to adapt is going to get you to elicit a result. So take time to actually standardize your program, write it down, track it. Don't give a shit how you do it. There's an app, a spreadsheet, a training journal, I don't care. Write it down, track it, know what your movements are, and then off you go. Is there areas you struggle with during prep? Yes. Yeah, look, everyone's going to struggle with different things in prep. You don't care who you are. Prep by nature, in and of itself, is stressful, it's difficult. You're going to have struggles. You know, like, you simply by the act of comp prepping become less and less energized and have less and less energy to do things with people, do things with your job. So finding ways to continue to facilitate the same level of operation is difficult. So one of the things that I struggle with is obviously energy availability and keeping the progression of the business up. So I do a lot of time leading up to the show, leading up to prep, into even early parts of prep, making sure we have objective numbers, objective goals, objective data, so that I can, at bare minimum, sustain or maintain business growth or business circumstances. So at least then, you know, I'm not trying to take on a bunch of clients when I'm just not in the mental position to handle it. You know, if I can't deliver my best to a client, I won't take them on. So during the prep, just making sure that we have things in place to take care of that, so I know, okay, now's the time to cancel or stop taking on clients or not try and push myself too far because I can't deliver it. Things like seeing people, I just start to get further and further inside the hobbit hole and just kind of not isolate myself, but it just becomes more and more a fact of, if it's not serving me or the business for this point in time, I'm not worrying about it. You know, this prep, the last month will be at uni as well. Uni should be back. So it'll basically come down to preserving energy for prep, uni and clients or / business. And if it doesn't serve those things, we're just probably not going to do it. So one of the things that, it's not really a struggle for me, but it is a struggle that, you know, I become less and less interested in doing things outside of that during that period of time, which makes sense. It's an understandable outcome or situation, but that's just something where it usually puts a struggle on other relationships or situations because, you know, you just don't have the energy or time to do those things with people. So I usually try and get that stuff out of the way early in prep and just sort of start to indicate to friendships and relationships like, hey, this is going to be this period of time. I probably can't do much, can't do these things. And it does weigh on me to a degree, but at the same time, it's more of it's a dichotomous struggle, a duality of a struggle because it's affecting other people, and that's what I don't want to happen. So that's probably the biggest struggle for me, is just taking care of that, make sure that's sorted so that it doesn't weigh on me in the back end of prep, less stress to deal with, and start learning to tell people no. Are there emerging trends in sports psych that excite you? I'll do this in two directions. It's areas in sports psych, which is psychology, that are frustrating me, and there are areas in sports psych that are exciting me. One being, I'm excited more coaches are getting concerned with the psychological aspect to any athlete's process, even just Gen Pop clients, like people starting to take psychology more seriously and the psychological relationship to the outcome. I think it's fantastic. What I'm also getting sick of though is everyone thinking they're a psychologist because they did a 2-day weekend course. Thinking that you've developed some like lifelong knowledge on a construct or a system of the body that's so complex it may as well be its own individual body. You know, we have the psychosomatic of the brain and the body. They're not separate, but it's so complex and intertwined and intricate that there are unique fields of study in and amongst the brain in of itself. People think they've mastered it in a 2-day course that they can understand people, which is ridiculous. But I think the thing that is exciting me most is psychological skills training is starting becoming more comprehensive and more understood. Having athletes, coaches, team coaches, not just performance coaches, actually understanding that, you know, these skills that were naturally ingrained in a Kobe or a Michael that they just somehow knew they aren't skills, abilities, or traits that just have to be unique to that person. And we can actually we can train the same way we train a muscle, the same way we train stress. We can train an individual to control outcomes better psychologically by using some of these tools. You know, visualization, imagery, emotional regulation skills, stress management skills. You know, we look at self-talk language, self-talk skills, goal setting as a psychological skill construct. You know, all these things are leading to athletes performing better under pressure, performing better in situations, and it's completing the athlete profile more than just being like, well, I told him to run fast and jump high, like that's great, but what if he has a panic attack under pressure? Then all of a sudden that running fast slows the fuck down and that jumping high becomes I can't move. So to me, that's where the field is becoming exciting, is it's becoming more readily available, more accessible, and more understood. It's just that the people who probably shouldn't be talking about it are talking about it. How do you have the conversation about relationships impacting athletes? Lou, like this. One of the biggest problems people make in partnerships or relationships, or just having relationships, friends, family, male, female partner, whatever. When they start something of high demand, of high pursuit, or at a high caliber level, one of the biggest mistakes you'll make is starting that without discussing with other people around you that are involved or that will be involved as a byproduct or proxy. So bodybuilding is a solo sport when you're on stage, sure. But bodybuilding in a relationship is not a solo endeavor. You have to have clear understandings, boundaries, expectations, schedules, routines, systems in place when you have partnerships so that everyone is equally aware of what's going on. The person alongside you, though not getting on stage, to a degree becomes equally involved when it starts demanding more of your time, your life. You know, you can't attend social events, you don't go out as much, you don't do the activities you might have normally done before prepping, or at least not to the same degree. So sitting down and having the conversation about what that looks like, even with friends and family, I encourage, especially if I work with couples, I will sit them down and encourage either the one that I'm working with or both to attend the call, understand like, hey, this is what this is going to look like. If I can't get buy-in from the partner, it's going to make my job as a coach that much harder for the actual client and trying to get that result. You know, I was with someone once upon a time where when I would start a cut or I would start a recomposition phase, all of a sudden they decided now's the time to start baking. And I used to think it was a weird occurrence. When I look back at it now, there was a clear limitation that they were trying to place on me because of whatever situation they had going on. Don't need to go into that, but just simply the fact that every single time I decided to cut or recomposition, there would be baking that was never done anywhere else. So examples of that, though it's my choice to eat the food or not to eat the food, those environments become impacted by the actions and decisions of the people around you. So having buy-in from everyone on the same page, or having everyone aware of what's going on, or the clear limitations, having support, having people agree, believe in what you're doing and go alongside of it is almost paramount to the success of the outcome. So to me, I not only encourage, but I implore you to sit down and have genuine conversation with people around you, that you're about to undertake something quite intense, something severe, something extreme, and it will take pretty much everything you have to complete it and get it done, and get it done to a high level. And you need their support, their encouragement, their understanding. At the bare minimum, you need their understanding. I don't care if you don't ask me to do things. I don't care if you don't want to do it with me. I don't care, X, Y, Z. Just understanding of what the process is going to look like and what's going to happen, so that they place less stress on you. You know, having friends that complain you change or you don't come out as much, having partnerships that complain because you can't go out drinking and eat anymore. Those little nags over time don't seem like big deals, but when you have literally no energy left in a comp prep, that emotional bandwidth gets very, very, very small very quickly. And you need to save that for the things that matter. So having those conversations, I think, is important. Structuring them, setting them up, scheduling them in to sit down and say this needs to happen is a non-negotiable to me for anyone with serious relationships. Another mistake, it's not a question, but another mistake that I think people make early on in their training career is getting too caught up with nuance, missing forest for the trees and not moving the big blocks first. Complexity has its place, especially as an athlete advances, and we need to look at micro details to get the most out of the muscle tissue, get the most out of the genetic potential that they have. But one of the things that I feel the evidence-based community has created and all the information that is on Instagram is actually getting to a point of almost an inverted return. There's so much information that we are over-polarizing, we are over-complicating, and we've got people now taking 45 minutes to set up one exercise and might only have 90 minutes to train because this is now the optimal bar path, or this is the optimal line of pull. And we're missing out on total stimulus, total intensity, and total drive because we're more concerned with that optimal setup. The reality is I could have had that client do 2 or 3 extra movements and it might be 5% less optimal, but it was 150% more time efficient and effective, therefore being more effective overall because they can get more out of that person. So looking at your training aids, looking at your experience in the gym, I try to really teach fundamentals first and foremost, program fundamentals, people to understand mechanics, stability, understand movement patterns. As they develop and advance and get better, and depending on their responses and their return over time, we start to add more complexity in micro doses based on what is needed, not what is just because it's cool on Instagram. But I think a lot of people get caught up, and probably going to be some 20-year-old telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, or the latest research says this, not even understanding how to read research. It's just because someone they follow on Instagram told them this is what the research says. We're getting too complex to the point where the return on the complexity isn't quite as high. So the return on the investment doesn't seem to match up. So to me, I'd rather reduce the complexity slightly, get more return on my dollar being time, and yield that result. And then as the client gets more demand for specificity, then we introduce it. But for the most part, the majority of people aren't coaching top tier, near pro card or pro level bodybuilders and athletes that require that level of nuance that have 2 or 3 hours to train. So that's one of my takes. I'm sure there'll be some 21-year-old that'll tell me I'm wrong. All right, so I didn't really like that last set, the previous set. I want to try and get, with a movement like this, I want to try and get over the bench more, allow the lat and the scap to stretch fully, and then retract back up, trying to hit that mid-back as much as possible, upper mid-back. So trying to allow the scaps to move forward, the shoulders to come forward and then stretch up. Previous setup, the last set, Didn't feel I was getting that as much. So yeah, this set I was trying to just get over that bench a little bit more, as you would have seen the difference. Trying to get myself over the bench that a little bit further, trying to get more stretch out of my back. When it comes to training, we've talked on mechanical tension, we've talked on progressive overload, talked on stimulus, talked on generally loading the muscle tissue, right? One of the things people get really caught up on in the reads, in my opinion, is the intensity versus control tension debate. And they get put on a spectrum, right? They get put on like a sliding scale, like more or less which one am I trying to hit, as if you can't do both. And it's where I find a lot of people get caught up. You know, they focus solely on this, the mind-muscle connection. You know, make sure there's maximum tension across the entire movement curve. Make sure the resistance profile is perfect at every position. And you end up with a 10 kilo lat pull down that I've got 20-year-olds that can quadruple on with still good control. So we're trading off overloading the muscle with quality tension at that general increase in intensity, which we know realistically load is one of the greatest drivers of hypertrophy, greatest drivers of stimulus. Now load with control on the muscle that is the limiting factor is ideal, but going too far to the right, you know, let's say left and right, you've got intensity and you've got your control and I guess like that mind-muscle connection focus on tension. Going too far to the right where you're completely giving up the objective idea to load and get strong is going to cost you generating stimulus, because you can only do 10-second, 20-second eccentrics for so long. You're not going to drive hypertrophy with time and attention as much as you think you are. Going too far the other way, and it's where you start to get people who just simply look at moving weight from A to B and moving through time and space as fast as possible, not realizing we need to be looking at loading the muscle as effectively as possible and driving actual intensity onto the muscle we're trying to work with good control. You end up losing that tension. So getting yourself caught up in like which one's more important, again, these dichotomous debates that are almost redundant because it's not a one or the other situation. Get focused on lifting with intensity with as much control as possible. Find that middle ground if you even want to put it on a spectrum. I rarely do. I don't actually like the idea of putting that on a spectrum. I believe they're both independent factors that we need in good quality training. Find that happy medium where you can train with control and maximize tension on the target muscle with as much intensity as possible. When you start to trade off one for the other, you start to come back and look at it and go, what am I doing? Am I trading off the form that I want to try and increase load? If I'm doing that, decrease the load until that form is better. If I'm going too light for the sake that I don't want to give up my optimal form, look at it and go, am I actually driving as much hypertrophy and progressive overload as possible, or can I do better? That way, that's more of the conversation we should be having, rather than like, well, I'm more focused, I want to make sure that I have a 20-second time and attention and my intensity is not that high on load. In my opinion, anyway. Alrighty guys, so that is the end of November vlog 2. By the time this one comes out, we'll probably be really into the depths now of getting hungry by the time this one comes out. So let's assume we're gonna look at probably like 2 weeks from now, something like that. So we're going, so a week from now, I don't know. Point being, coming into December, things are probably gonna tighten up a bit more and start to get really hungry and really start to drive the fat loss. So yeah, looking forward to that next intent level of prep kicking off. We're going to keep you guys following along. This sort of bridging phase has been kind of boring to a degree for most people, I'm sure. It's not as exciting hearing about like fat loss strategies and things like that. But realistically, we've got the body into a much better prepared position, so the next 20 weeks now can run smoothly. We've reduced a lot of inflammation, reduced stress. Blood work came back completely healthy, which is fantastic. We've got room now to move. We've got room to increase supplementation. We've got room to increase training, and the body can actually handle it. So all those factors now, the idea of this bridging phase is to get in that position so that we have a great platform to launch the prep from, and we're not overstressing the body from day one, because then we know stress accumulates in the back end and that's where you start to look worse. So we're managing all these things now at the front end, so we have room to get aggressive, be hungry, drop some body fat quickly, then tighten back up and add some more food in if we need to. So all in all, things are moving as predicted, as expected. And yeah, that should be kind of how the next couple of weeks goes. So at the moment, if you are following along, we have officially closed our books for the next 4 weeks. As we said in our bunch of content, even yesterday's video and some content we put on Instagram, it is not that we are too full or we're overworking ourselves or anything. It's just simply we like to have periods of time to consolidate and make sure we're taking care of who we have, make sure we're taking care of everyone, and get projects and things that we've promised people finished off. There's a lot of back-end stuff we're looking at putting out, educational content, lecture series, psychology content for people, for athletes and prep athletes. So there's a lot to come that we want to finish off in 2024 before we start Q1 for 25. So we are just making sure that we get all that finished and still taking care of our people. If you are interested in working with us and you do want to get into the season for 2025, book in the inquiry form on the website. We are taking expressions of interest so that we can actually link up with you, have a conversation, see if we fit. A lot of coaches will take everyone just because they want the clients, but rarely are they asking, am I the right coach for you? I'm not the right coach for everybody, and I know that. So we will actually work with you to have a conversation, see are we the right team, and are we going to be a right fit together? And then we'll actually set up a strategy for how we can start in 25. So reach out, book it in, have a conversation, and then we'll go from there into the new year. But for now, books are closed for a little while, and we're just going to take care of who we have. And yeah, that is pretty much the end of November training.